So hello everyone, my name is Artemis Karlatidou and I'm a lecturer in citizen science in the Department of Geography at UCL and the People Nature Lab. I would like to welcome you to this series of online webinars that we organize at UCL and the People Nature Lab at UCL East, and which are funded by the ERASMUS Plus project called Community-Driven Digital Action, a Catalyst for Social Change in the COVID-19 Crisis, or HEIDI in short. The online webinars aim to promote citizen science, hence their title Citizen Science for All Talks. Each Citizen Science for All event has a specific theme, and we invite world-leading experts to share their knowledge from their specific field of practice and the many years of experience that they have working in this area. In this Citizen Science for All event, we will be talking about citizen science with Indigenous community, which is the third webinar we organized on this specific topic. Today we have two speakers. We will start with Finn Danielsen, who is an ecologist with the Nordic Foundation for Development and Ecology in Denmark. With many partners, Finn has spearheaded the development and institutionalization of bottom-up approaches to natural resource monitoring and management in many regions of the world. Recently, Finn co-led the development of a special section on community-based monitoring in the Journal of Biosciences. The second speaker for today is PâviâraK Jakobsen. Mr. Jakobsen is an advisor to cocreators municipality, Greenland, and the coordinator of the PâviâraK program in Disko Bay, Greenland. PâviâraK has received the Nordic Council Environment Prize for the PâviâraK program for its accessible and innovative methods to involve local people in the documentation and management of the environment and living resources. Alice Shepard will be live tweeting the event, and you can use Twitter to pose your questions, or you can use the chat area here to pose your questions, and Alice will also transfer them on Twitter. Due to the limited time we have, we will be only able to take a couple of questions at the end, but you can use Twitter or you can email our speakers, and hopefully they're happy to reply to you and answer your questions. Thank you very much. Finn, over to you.
Thank you very much for this introduction. Artemis, I'd like to tell you a bit about our experiences with citizen science and indigenous peoples. And I come from a Nordic Agency for Development and Ecology. We are a group of anthropologists and biologists who for many years have worked with setting up programs for community-based monitoring and management of natural resources, often in areas with indigenous communities. So we have, over the years, we tried to compile the key lessons learned from these different initiatives. And recently, we published a monograph on community-based monitoring programs in the Arctic with University of Alaska Press, the book there in the middle. And then a couple of months ago, we have put together with many co-authors a special collection of papers in the journal Bioscience about these experiences. I think the really unique part of or the aspect of these programs that we are involved with is that many of them are being sustained more than 10 years after external support have ceased. The background for what we're doing is that we for many people, involvement of community members in citizen science is an either-or. It's either you involve community members or you don't involve community members. We think it's much more nuanced than that. We compiled all the published papers about monitoring programs for the environment that we could find, and then we looked at who is it that are compiling the information and what are the role of scientists and community members in these different programs. And we realized that there is a huge spectrum of approaches from on the left side, scientists executed monitoring without any involvement of community members, to on the right side, autonomous local monitoring undertaken by community members on their own without scientists, and then groups in between with different levels, different degrees of involvement of community members. There's a number of typologies about for citizen science and community and monitoring programs. But this, we think, is the only one that's actually based on a quantitative statistical analysis. And we find that there are 5 different types. And those that we have found particularly interesting are what we could call community-based monitoring programs, monitoring where indigenous and local communities are contributing with more than just observations. It's the one in the red quadrangle here. So people say autonomous local monitoring are community members that are already doing it on their own without involvement of scientists, and that is actually the case. I mean, for many people that are dependent on natural resources for their livelihood, it's part of their survival strategy to look after what's happening in the environment. If they were not following what's happening in the environment, they wouldn't be able to successfully go hunting or catching or fishing or herding or farming. But what we are particularly interested in, because we early realized that here there's a huge potential to really change things for the better on the ground, are these 2 types that we here call collaborative monitoring with local or collaborative monitoring with external data interpretation, where community members' role is not only collecting data, but also designing the program based on what they would like to look for, the methods they would like to use, interpreting the findings themselves, and often also using it for management actions or for informing decision makers about what they should do. The citizen science approach we typically see here in Western Europe is the one here called externally driven monitoring with local data collectors, where the role of community members or citizens, as we call them here, is more or less mostly collecting data for the scientists. So we see it's quite different types of approaches we're talking about here. And sometimes community members are keeping track of, we could say, indigenous indicators. It can, for instance, be the amount of fat on a wild animal they've caught, but other times it can be using scientific indicators adapted to non-technical use, such as, for instance, this Vietnamese who is measuring the tree because the amount of carbon stored in forest is very important, because CO2 is the primary greenhouse gas emitted by human activities, and changes in forest carbon can help mitigate climate change, or they can exacerbate the problem. Now, recently, we've been aware of a huge study that have actually documented the importance of these approaches. Paul Ferraro, Aaron Agrawal, and that group, they have introduced community monitoring to 400 communities in 6 countries, communities that were randomly selected, and they also and then they looked at what was the result of introducing community-based monitoring to the communities, and they compared it to 347 control communities. This is really huge study. And they conclude that it leads to, across the board, it leads to a reduced resource extraction and increased user satisfaction. In fact, they find that a measurable effect size is comparable to the effect size of the establishment of protected areas, or to the establishment of payment for environment service programs. So we actually talk about a really persuasive, well-documented study here, underlining the importance of community-based monitoring for sustainable development. Now, we have in one of the places where we've been involved in Tanzania, we were able to go back after 10 years where we've not been involved in the area, and ask community members, why is it that you're continuing looking after the natural resources and telling the authorities about what is happening? And it was clear that they did this because it helped them obtain greater influence on and involvement in the natural resource decisions. We were able to show 4 different aspects of empowerment, which I've shown here on this screen, but the most important was political empowerment in this way. it promotes conflict resolution and self-determination. And we at one point we thought, well, maybe it's just the process, of moving, of discussing what is going on. But no, that was not the message was clear from the communities. It was because that there were new data about the environment involved, because it produced empirical data that the government found it very hard to ignore. Then we often come across scientists and decision makers that say, but can you rely on community data? And we've been doing a whole number of tests over the years, 5 different tests, walked at a distance equal to the circumference of the Earth. And again, we've documented in different contexts with different approaches across different cultural, social, political systems, that findings by community members are correspondent with findings by scientists. Then we wondered what we seem to see that the community approaches that it leads to more action by decision makers. So we tried to keep track of how many management interventions came out of different types of monitoring approaches. This was in the Philippines. It was over 3 years in 12 protected areas. So for the same amount of money, we established 2 participatory methods and 2 scientist-run monitoring methods in the same protected areas. And then we counted how many times did it lead to some kind of action. It could be, for instance, a local bylaw, municipality agreeing we should not hunt wild pig during the breeding season because there will be less pigs to hunt later, and it's not good to do. That's an example of a management intervention. And we saw that for the same amount of money, there were 4 to 6 times more management interventions emanating from the participatory methods on the right side, those in red, than those in blue, the scientist-run methods. We then thought, well, maybe it's because they are not really targeting the key threats to the biodiversity of the area, or maybe it's not really permanent actions. So we had an independent group of biologists say, what are the main threats to the biodiversity in these areas? And then we looked at how many of these management interventions actually address these. And we found again, that's the second panel, again, that far more management interventions targeting key threats came out of the participatory methods. We also looked at how many of them led to policy change. This could be policy change at any level, also at the community level with a municipal bylaw or a protected area guideline or policy of some kind. And again, we saw 4 to 6 times more management interventions emanating from the participatory methods than from the conventional scientific methods. Then we thought, well, maybe it's only resource use by local people that is being targeted. And so we distinguished each of the management interventions, who is it that each one is addressing. And we found that it's both management interventions addressing locals people resource use, as well as management interventions addressing outsiders. In any way we looked, we found that the pattern was clear. Participation boosts action. Then we wondered, maybe this was only in the Philippines. Maybe there's a special situation there. So we looked again at the 3,500 published articles from the Web of Science, and we tried to look at carefully who is it that for those articles that are dealing with monitoring programs, who are how long time does it take from we collect data until the data are ready to take decisions on, and also who is it that are supposed to take decisions. And we found that there was a very clear difference here. In the participatory monitoring systems, the time from data collection to decision making is often very short, sometimes even less than a year. Whereas when you involve scientists, it can take 3 to 9 years or even more from you start collecting data until the results are ready for deciding upon. But when we then looked at who is it that takes decision, that are supposed to take decisions from the monitoring programs, the picture is also very different. It's the community members, the community member programs typically are aimed at decision making at the village level, whereas the scientists are typically aimed at decision making at national level or even international level. So when we combine these two graphs, we then see that there's a huge gap between the different kinds of approaches here. It's really targeting different groups of decision makers and different and leading to having an impact at different level. And it also showed to us that you can do a lot of monitoring with scientists without getting to any decision making. But you can then also do monitoring with scientists and, for instance, have the Kyoto Protocol ratified by the US government. And that is a major management intervention that would happen, right? So it's, the point here is that the approaches are very different, and we need to bear that in mind. I'd like then to show an example of a community-based monitoring program that includes indigenous and local communities. And this is the one that PâviâraK will also talk more about in a moment. It's about local documentation and management of living resources by hunters and fishers in Greenland. So the way the program was established was that the government staff contact community leaders and asked, are you interested in being involved in looking after resources? Community leaders then invited community members, and they asked, together with the government staff, are you happy with the management of resources? Which threats, which species and uses are most important to you? Are you being heard? Do you feel that you're being listened to? Would you like to communicate your observations and knowledge in a more systematic way? And if they were interested, they established a natural resource council, and they themselves, the community members themselves, decided on the focus for the monitoring, which species to look for, where to look for them, how to look for them, and so on. And it's built on only observations are carried out with the daily routines when they're going out hunting and fishing, visiting family members, or going to town, and so on. Anyway, they're not doing separate activities to carry this out. They do it as part of their daily routines. And the measuring, the counting, and the meetings and reporting have been kept to an absolute minimum. The approach is most similar to what social scientists would call a focus group discussion approach. So this is a photo from when Pisuna program was introduced in the community of Addo back in 2013. PâviâraK there standing on the left. And here's a photo by a community member of the cod. They've the Atlantic cod they've caught in a net, trying to get the attention of the decision makers that there are cods out there. This is a quick look at the summary form, which is being used so that community members every third month discuss how is it going with the resources in this particular area. Are there more or less than at the same time last year? Or maybe we don't know, or maybe there's no change. And if there is a change, is it an important change or not? And if it's an important change, what could be the possible explanation of the trend? And is there something that should be done about it? Who should do what and when? So you see, there's an interpretation built in to this filling out this summary form. The community members, they meet every 3 months, discuss the resources they've agreed upon, and fill in this summary form in dialogue by phone with PâviâraK. So the data managers, they are the hunters and fishermen. Here are some tips about where is community monitoring most relevant based on our experiences. And it's when natural resources are important to people. It's when the information generated can have an impact on resource management. If there's no chance it can have any impact because the natural resources, the wildlife is fenced off, there's no point of involving community members. It's not going to be sustained. It's in areas when there are clear links from monitoring to decision-making on resource management, and preferably in areas where policies are actually allowing community members to have a voice in decision-making. And then, of course, there need to be some funds available for financing a monitoring system because it cannot run on its own without any money at all. And one should really remember that the key motivation for people is to protect local rights over land and resources. Don't think it's something else. It's about protecting rights. We recently tried to write down a number of aspirations or important aspects if we want to support indigenous and local knowledge systems, IFK systems through citizen science. And there are 6 things that are really important. One is that you recognize indigenous and local knowledge as a valid source of knowledge in decision making. Don't undermine the local institutions, the local experts and their legitimacy. Recognize them. The second is that it's important that you see indigenous local knowledge as management practices, as governance mechanisms and decision support. Don't impose your methods and say this is the things that should be done. Ask instead, what are the ways that you would like to do this? The third is indigenous and local communities understanding local social and ecological systems should be valued and taken fully into account. So be very careful that the approach of science does not overrule the cultural specificities of the local context. And the fourth is that self-determined problems should be addressed, potentially empowering the local agency. So don't focus too much on quality assurance and replicability and things like that, which you tend to do as a scientist, because that can overrule the self-determined priorities of the communities, the reason why they're interested in doing this. And then knowledge governance should be developed jointly in mutual agreement. So it's really important to avoid that the indigenous peoples, they don't lose access to or lose control of their knowledge, of their observations. And then, of course, indigenous local communities should be really seen as knowledge holders, stakeholders, right holders, and not as unpaid volunteers, as they are sometimes seen. So in short, the key tips are: listen first, co-create, keep things simple, build on existing structures, because that's how you get impact. That's how you can sustain things when the project is over. Keep the need for training to a minimum. Ensure that community findings are communicated to decision makers. And actually, one of the 4 review papers in this special collection in bioscience is exactly about creating synergies between citizen science and indigenous and local knowledge, and was led by Maria Tengel. Thanks a lot. That's all I want to say for now, and I'll pass over the floor to PâviâraK.
Thank you so much, Finn. That was an excellent talk. And the paper in the beginning, it was so interesting. Thank you so much. Shall I play the file? Okay, excellent then. Just give me 1 second.
Sure.
I have to share my screen first. Just give me one. Okay, hopefully.
Can you turn up the volume, Artemis? So we are looking at a couple of a man and a woman, Greenland fishermen.
Just 1 second. Do you want me to play it with no volume then?
No, please. But I don't think there were any volume in it. There should be some sound on.
Yeah, there is. You cannot hear it. Just
no.
Confirm again.
Lessons from Pishuna in Greenland.
That's better. It's working now.
Just go ahead.
My name is PâviâraK Jakobsen. I live in Asiat in Greenland. I'm advisor to Peltelik municipality. This is one of the municipalities in the West Greenland. Since 2009, I have participated in the PâviâraK program. I would like to tell you about this. This project received funding from the European Commission through the PES program. Challenges: climate change, rapid changes in stocks, limited dialogue between hunters, fishermen, management, and researchers, minimal local involvement in managing resources. The project Opening Doors to Native Knowledge was proposed in 2009 by the Ministry of Fisheries, Hunting and Agriculture. PâviâraK municipality was proposed as a trial area. The municipality accepted the project and started in 2010 in 3 communities, Aquanak, Ilulissat, and Qarsut. Aquanak and Qarsut are settlements, and Ilulissat is a town. Goals: optimize the management and monitoring of living resources through intense cooperation between hunters, fishermen, and managers and researchers, and through increased involvement of locals in observing. Establish locality hunters and fishermen based monitoring and management of the resources in 3 settlements. 1. Better dialogue between hunters, fishermen, managers, and researchers. 2. Strengthen local involvement in monitoring resources and in management these resources within sustainable frameworks. The 3rd, better adaptation of resource utilization to change in stocks as a result of climate change. The village communities establish local PâviâraK natural resource councils comprised of fishers and hunters with environment interests. They decided which species and resource uses should be monitored. The members compiled data during field visits. Every 3 months, the fishermen and hunters discuss the status of the resources and possible management interventions, for instance, in Attu. I'm based in Asia, trying to steer the meeting and stick to the topics. For example, Attu PâviâraK Council is here. Species and resource uses. Beluga and now as walrus, seals, polar guillemots, eider, Canadian goose, lumpfish, halibut, salmon, cod, catfish, muskox, reindeer, scallop whistles. 2 kinds of eider dogs are followed. Eider from Davis Straits that are displaced each year by the west ice and the coastal eider. Meeting in a local PâviâraK Natural Resources Council in Attu. Here a photo from the last meeting. You can see that everyone is looking down on a particular point, mobile phone. I sit 85 kilometers away and I'm entering the data into the PâviâraK form. Keeping a meeting is easy, but capturing the people is hard. We have discussed the status of natural resources in PâviâraK regularly about every 3 months for 10 years, nearly 12 years. 8 communities has been involved. Proposals for management interventions and the supporting data have been forwarded to the government. Finding example codes in PâviâraK. PâviâraK in computers. This has resulted in 494 management proposals. Changing in fishing and hunting seasons, 146. Changing in quotas, 123. Other change of rules and bylaws, 125. Facilitate trades, 35. Increase monitoring and research, 30. Current management is fine, 36. Status of the management proposals. The proposals concern 90 different actions for 30 species resource uses. Most submit to the local government authority. A few submit to the central government. Outcome. Hunters and fishermen and observations of the resources are beginning to systematically documented. Observations and management proposals are available online PâviâraK. Hunters and fishermen are beginning to be listened to, but there are still challenges. Barriers. Some management proposals from community members are not taken serious by government resource managers. 2. Insufficient respect among scientists for the knowledge and observation of community members who often have no academic education but lifelong experiences in the nature. Third, lack of an enabling government policy in support of community-based observing. That's all. PâviâraK. Thank you.
I would like to thank you everyone for joining and our speakers for their fantastic talks. It was very inspiring. Thank you, Finn. Thank you, PâviâraK. And hopefully we will see you soon. Hopefully everyone enjoyed it.